Welcome back to Fables of Refuge. We're going to dive in to Jarrett's mind and learn more about the campaign setting that we're going to be having a venture in.
Yeah. It's gonna be great.
The Elders.
The Elder Warren. So this ties in with magic as well. So everything has to be connected in my mind. But every magic user on Refuge draws their power from Warrens. If you're a sorcerer, if you're a mage, whatever it is, you are drawing your power from a Warren, which is a place, but also like a battery. So you can go into a Warren and travel. It's kind of like going into just the planes. Like I'm in the plane of air, plane of water. So I've reskinned the plane of water to be the Warren of water. That's what got opened up, that flooded the world. I've connected planes with magical power on the planet.
How does that affect how players use magic?
It's more of a flavor thing, which I think is fun. So instead of, there's questions to ask with where certain people's power comes from, because sorcerers use wild magic. It has manifested in them and they're using it. Mm-hmm. So I'm like, oh, what if that magic came from somewhere different than what the established order of magic in Warrens comes from? What if there's some kind of chaotic force between Warrens? Maybe that could be. What does that do to the other magics?
Ooh.
And then there's also anti-magic that exists. So nullification of magic.
Right.
So there's the opposite. Does that have a Warren? So there's questions to be asked here. The Elder Warrens are particularly special.
Okay.
So there's Talva Ive, Talva Yave, and Talva Nave.
Is this common knowledge?
This is sort of like how we know Greek myth.
Okay.
So people are educated people are very aware of it. Uneducated people have probably heard of it. But there's also 3 types of elves on Refuge.
Okay.
There's the Ive, the Yave, and the Nave. Let me make sure I get them straight. And all I did in the campaign for this, technically, is I took elves, as we know them, light elves, as light. The Ive. They are your traditional D&D elf, tall, bright-eyed, usually with magic and usually good aligned. I don't like alignment, so this is going to be a thing throughout the campaign. So Ive are your traditional elf. Then there's the Neve, which are elves of darkness. So these are drow.
Right.
So dark elves, but they exist here. So I'm saying that they are the Neve. So that I've just reskinned them as a like kind of different race. They're still drow, but they're now the Neve on Refuge. And then there's the Yave, which are elves of shadow, which for the game balance wise, that's wood elves.
Okay.
A little bit wilder. So, and each of these 3 races may have originated within these Warrens, much like how gnomes in Pathfinder, at least, gnomes originated in the Third World, in the Feywilds.
Okay.
Gnomes came from there and then became a race in the material plane. It's sort of along those lines.
Gotcha.
So,
would most, for the sake of this, most elves as NPCs, would they be aware of this?
if these elves are raised in a traditional culture, then yes, they would know I'm an Eve. My lineage goes back to Father Light, the elder god of Talva Eve. And if they are traditional, they worship Father Light.
Gotcha.
Who is an imposing figure of good. So the Nave, elves of darkness. So drow do still live in the Underdark in Refuge, but to me the Underdark is like a pocket dimension that is next to the Warren of Darkness, Talva Nave. And so it's still the Underdark. So you can go there just like in D&D and it's a thing, but it's a Warren adjacent dimension essentially. So the dimension Warren is kind of interchangeable here. So they came out of the Warren of Darkness, and then Elder Dark is Mother Dark, is the elder god of darkness. She is believed to have been lost, and a lot of drow then switched over to worshiping Lolth, which is traditional D&D, the Lolth queen of the Underdark. So she's a giant spider evil goddess. So there are drow that identify as drow and they worship Lolth. And then, but because I don't believe that any race designates your alignment, I think that's stupid. That's why I hate alignment. You can be born a dark elf and not be evil. Like, why would being born a dark elf make you evil? Same as an orc, same as a goblin. Like, goblins might have a tendency for chaos and destruction, but that doesn't necessarily make them evil. If one of them decided to not be, they could not be.
My favorite alignments are lawful, chaos, and neutral.
Yeah.
Nothing good or bad in there.
Yeah.
Because that
like
kind of
better.
dictates a direction.
Mm-hmm. And it gets sticky, and it has to, because of like, oh, well, good clerics can banish evil, so you need to have the alignment for the technicals of the game.
Right.
But me as a DM, I don't like alignment. I think alignment is tricky, and alignment gets sticky, and that we as humans in real life, we are not all good or all evil or all lawful or all chaotic. We usually tend to one ways or another, but a very good person can do something very evil and justify it to themselves for whatever reasoning.
Mm-hmm.
And does that make them an evil person? I guess it depends on what they did. But a really bad person who doesn't give a shit about anybody else could do something incredibly selfless and to help someone, and that would be considered very good. I think that's more interesting for players and characters, to have characters be a little more fluid. Now, if you're gonna be a cleric or a paladin or whatever, maybe your alignment is more important. But if you're not, how good are you? Yeah. So, and that goes back to your race. So, like, these elves of darkness aren't necessarily evil. Neve aren't necessarily evil. Drow, self-identifying Drow maybe, if they worship Lolth.
Yeah.
But they've chosen that path, or it was thrust upon them and they don't know otherwise. Oh, well, I grew up in this culture worshiping Lolth Queen, but I really didn't like it, so I left.
Right.
Refuge is a place where that can happen, and is very common. And then the Yave are elves of shadow. And so if there's light and darkness, there's shadow. It's a very confounding, it's an inherently esoteric place. Confusing, and it goes against itself. So the elves of shadow are wood elves. So they're a little wilder. They usually have more brown than tan skin, and are a bit, they tend to be more chaotic than lawful. And they prefer to be out in nature where the laws of nature happen, because shadow is that way. It's bendy. Contrarian nature. There we go. They have an inherent contrarian nature. The elder god of shadow is sometimes the twins of shadow. So it's sometimes more than one. The god of shadow isn't necessarily gendered. Mm-hmm. Like Father Light and Mother Dark are gendered, but shadow tends to not gender their gods, because it's all that flexibility, right? They're like, what is a gender, and if what does any of that mean? Is it important? And the twins aspects are like just thrown out into real life. So their religious practice is one of animus. So they'll say, well, this is a good cup. It's a good cup today. And so and if you care about the cup and take care of this cup over 100 years or 1,000 years, if you've taken care of that cup, would it be imbued with the power of God? It's like, or of its own essence as being a good cup for 1,000 years, would it become its own spirit? And it is hard to think about these things when you're creating. It's like, oh God, what am I doing to myself? But I think that's an interesting flavor. But these are elder gods. Like, it's not necessarily the big religion. It exists in the world. People know about it, mainly with the myth of the planet. And tying into that myth, the Everwar is supposedly a war between light and dark, with shadow caught in the middle. These elder gods, or these elder warrens, or whatever they are connected with the Everwar. And so some view that favorably, some think it's a perversion, some don't, just say, well, it was all connected then, and here we are now. Yeah. So when it comes to religious worship, a big theme in Refuge is individual choice. Like, what do these people want to? Does this dark elf want to worship Lolth? Do they want to worship Pelor? Do they want to worship Bahamut? Do they want to not worship anyone? So it drives to that. So you have all these different races. I wanted everybody in Refuge.
Yes.
So I want every race in Refuge that I can. I even have brought in beast folk. So for those who don't know, beast folk are like mouselings, ratlings.
My favorite.
Which are
literally my favorite.
It's Redwall. Redwall is such a huge part of my childhood that I was like, no, I want there to be like mouse people, because why not? Instead of making them like teeny, like they're this big,
They're like,
I wanted mouselings to be about halfling size.
yeah.
Maybe a little smaller, but they got a big mouse head and ears.
Kind of creepy.
It's kind of creepy. There's not a ton of them. I created a reason for how they came into existence.
Ooh.
and how they got established.
Do people know that? Like, as in, like, do folk know? Or is it just...
This might be one of those secrets. But I wanted there to be not just elves, dwarves, halflings, and humans, and orcs as bad guys. Because why should orcs just be bad guys? They're all there. Tabaxi, the cat people, Aarakocra, bird people. The world being completely covered in water for a while, you know, underwater people too. There's lots of water creatures. You know, there's all these races that D&D has concocted that generally they kind of clan it up like, oh, well, orcs are in clans out here. And yeah, there are orc clans, but there's also orcs and half-orcs in cities and towns. It's like in a world where everybody had to come together to survive. While the flood was happening, everybody had to work together to survive. That's going to tear people apart too, of course.
Yeah.
But that means that racism is different. Well, if everybody came together to survive and you're interacting with lots of people, most people aren't going to be racist. But also you have that backlash that if there's lots of different types of people that are all together, some elements will say, well, humans need to band together and remain to know what it is to be human.
Right.
This is a very real world racist analog of, you know, well, the white people, got to stick together and like all this, like, yeah, it's bullshit. So I was like, well, this has to exist because this makes sense to exist in this world. So there are groups out there that are like orcs for orcs, humans for humans, you know, that like don't believe in the cultures mixing together and being together and want to, you know, maintain their identities because that's real.
And that was the latest chapter in Meet the World that comes out of this guy's brain. I can't wait for the next one.
In D&D, sometimes you gotta draw out a sword and cut off a head.
Yeah.
But that's okay because it's not real. Do you have violent magic? Is magic that does necromancy physically tear the flesh of the person casting it? Like there's all sorts of details and how everything comes together with the game your players want to play and the game you're playing and are creating.